2020 has taught us a lot about what we don't know about streaming. So we thought we'd bring in Lee Carpenter with Vision 2 Marketing to tell us what we don't know.
Thanks for having me. One of the cool things that's been going on is streaming has exploded over the past few months. So I thought I would go through and tell everybody some of the easy ways to get into streaming and ways to make it look really good and professional and help you out with your streaming setup and knowledge.
So live from the CTS Learning Lab, Lee Carpenter with Vision 2 Marketing.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm going to go through what I call the how and the why of streaming basics from the beginning of signal flow all the way to the delivery to the audience. So starting off, I'm going to go through a few statistics here that just show you why the importance of streaming has come about very recently. Over the past few years, streaming has come from something that has been viewed by very few to being almost an as-needed thing in our today's society because of COVID-19 and the people having to be working from distance, not only with Zoom calls, but also for presentations for television. One of the good things about streaming is that you don't have to have a lot of equipment and a lot of television trucks and things like that in order to be able to perform a stream. You can do it as simply as something in your bedroom with a mobile device or something as sophisticated with television cameras if you have them available, but it helps you reach a wider audience with a lot less money. One of the statistics that I like to put up is this one right here as well. It just shows you the amount of viewership of streaming that has grown just in the past few months. This is a statistic that is based just on 2020 this year, and you can see that the amount of time people are viewing streams has exponentially increased, specifically because of COVID-19, but it's also allowed a lot of people to step into streaming and understand that the audience is there and it can be captive. This is another statistic that I like to show as well that just goes through and shows you why people like streaming. The cost of it is very cost effective for people that are on a budget or people that can't afford, again, television trucks or studios. It's very easy to obtain equipment. It's very easy to edit the shows, and it's very easy to get it online and get out to your audience. So going from that, we're going to go step into signal flow now. And live streaming starts with the ability to capture, whether it's live video or you're actually broadcasting pre-recorded content. From that process, it goes into an encoded process, which we'll go into a little bit more in a bit. Then the coded process happens either with a hardware encoder or through a computer encoder. And then from there, it gets broadcast out to the network, or it gets broadcast out to the internet. And it can be broadcast to both of those at the same time, which we'll go into a little bit deeper as well. So from the network, the computer software, you go through a decoder, which allows a stream to be viewed from the audience side or from somewhere else in a building if it's on a network, or it goes to a streaming website where it's also broadcast out to the audience. And this is going through a signal flow from what I call source to delivery. So a source can be something as simple as a mobile device, webcam, DSLR, video camera, or switcher. From that point, it has to be captured. And the capture can be also something as a mobile device, a computer, a capture device, or an encoder. And what that capturing does is it's actually taking that video and it's converting it into the encoding process, which packages it, compresses it, and allows it to be sent over the internet using a low amount of bandwidth. So it's able to be sent somewhere very easily with low bandwidth, but also can be received very easily as well. So through the encoding process, that can all be done through a mobile device, through hardware encoders and software. And then the delivery, that's how your audience is going to view it. So audience may be viewing it on a mobile device. They may be going through a decoder to see it on projection screens or on a display. They may be watching it through YouTube or on a computer or an app on their phone or other devices as well. So going through the sources, the easiest form of streaming in today's world is a mobile device. The reasoning is a mobile device has everything in your hand that you need to be able to stream. It has a capture ability with a camera built into it. It has the encoding capability because it can take that video, it can package it, and then it has the decoding capability because you can also watch videos on your mobile phone through a web browser or through apps. So you have the simplest form right in the palm of your hand. From there, you step up to what is the next simplest form, which would be IP or USB cameras. So most USB cameras can come in the form of a standard webcam like everybody's used, USB right into a computer, and then it can go through software, or it can go directly to a web internet page that has the ability to take that USB camera and use it as a source for encoded video. The other source for cameras are what are called IP cameras. And what an IP camera does is it has encoding built into the camera structure. So you have a network plug or jack on the back of the camera, and inside that camera, it's taking that image and it's capturing it and encoding it and sending it down the line, which allows you to connect it directly to a network and send that encoded image out to the internet. Capturing and encoding through this process is done a little bit differently based on the different types of cameras that you're using. So if you're using a USB camera, you always have to have software, or you always have to have a computer involved. If you're using IP, it can go always directly out to the internet. So those are the two different captures and encoding process. So capturing is literally the process of capturing the raw video in a digital format and encoding it or in recording it. And encoding it is taking the captured video content and converting it into a format which we call a codec that can then be streamed and recorded. Again, USB capture devices require a computer to be able to get that video out, and encoder can go directly to the internet or directly to a network. Audio capturing is also very important because audio parallels the video. So when you're capturing audio, there's a couple of different ways to go about it. One is you have the ability to capture the audio independently of the video through a computer, through an audio console, or directly into a camera. But it's also as important as having your video capture and encoded properly as well. You always want to capture video and audio at the highest quality that you possibly can, while taking into account that you need to have something that has a package enough bandwidth to be able to send it out over the network without bogging down building networks or having it be so heavily with bandwidth that it's really difficult to stream properly. This is different definitions of what a codec is. Again, a codec is just an electronic circuit or software that compresses and decompresses digital video. These are the most popular codecs that you probably seen or worked with, H.264 and H.265. The real difference between these two is H.265 has the ability to encode 4K. H.264 does not have the ability to encode at 4K, but it's the most popular one on the market right now. So every type of camera that you've ever seen that does security type cameras or IP cameras is typically using H.264. It's been around for a long, long time. A lot of new types of cameras are using H.65 that give you better resolution, higher frame rates, and the ability to stream all the way up to 8K. A codec for audio is also things that you've probably seen before as far as the different types, MP3s, AAC, and FLACs. MP3 is probably the most popular. I'm sure everybody's heard of an MP3. AAC is a little bit better of a quality than MP3, and it has a little bit better compression than the MP3, so you don't have as much loss in the MP3 and the AAC as you would in MP3. And then FLAC is also a codec that is completely lossless, so they don't package it up and they don't compress it at all compared to what they do with an AAC and an MP3. These are the different streaming protocols. So what happens through the process, you capture, you have your codec, which is how it's packaged up, and the protocol is how you are taking that codec and you're actually getting it out to the internet. The two most popular are RTMP and RTSP streams. So most every streaming protocol software that you've seen on the internet, Facebook, YouTube, all of these use one of these two different types of streaming protocols. Those are Flash-based protocols as well, so they're typically going to be on software and on streaming platforms that have been around for a while, but those are starting to move to the side, and newer platforms are coming which are called HTTP, and these are based on typically HTML5 and other platforms that are not Flash dependent, and you're going to see these become a lot more popular. Specifically, Apple HLS and MPEG-Dash, these are becoming very popular streaming protocols across the internet. This is the content path based on capture, encoding, streaming, and decoding, and these are the different types of protocols and such in order to deliver that. So again, going to the most basic capture, we have our mobile device, camera, capture device, encoder, or computer software, and then in the encoding process, these are the different types of encoding software or encoding platforms that are available for video and for audio. From there, it goes to the streaming protocol, which actually gets it out to the internet. And then on the decoding side, it's the same thing with video and audio. You can decode in RTMP and RTSP as well as MP3 and WAV in different formats for audio and video. So this is probably the most important slide or most important bit of information that we get asked as people that stream or also in installations. And this is the relationship between resolution, frame rate, bandwidth, and bit rate. And why these are important is because they all are very important individually, but they also have to work together in order to deliver the best stream. So they all have their equal importance, but together they need to be all taken into account in order to deliver the best stream based on the amount of bandwidth that you have in your building for your network. If you're remote and you're using a MiFi router and you need lower bandwidth but you need higher resolution, you need to understand the relationship between all these in order to deliver the best stream that you can possibly. So resolution is the video resolution, the number of distinct pixels horizontally and vertically in a picture. So a lot of it is typically resolutions that you've heard, which is 1080p or 1920 by 1080, and it's typically called out for the horizontal versus the vertical. So 1080p is 1920 wide, 1080 pixels tall. Frame rate per second is the amount of images that are captured in a second for video. So when you're talking about 1080p at 60, that means that you're capturing 60 frames per second at 1920 by 1080 resolution. The bit rate is the amount of data that's being captured or encoded. The higher the bit rate, the better the quality. That relationship is valid for both streaming and for recording. And one of the things that's important to know between streaming and recording is a lot of hardware encoders do both of those jobs at the same time. They are streaming and they are recording at the same time. And a lot of times you need to know if your streaming bit rate is at a certain level, your recording level needs to be at that level, or it may need to be higher. So you need to understand the amount of bandwidth that you have to work with for your hardware devices as well as your building network as well. So bandwidth is the relationship of the amount of data and the capacity required to transmit video content. So when we're talking about bandwidth, which we'll go into depth in the next couple of slides, you need to understand what your building or what your internet connection bandwidth is capable of. Do you have 4 megabytes of bandwidth, or do you have 104 megabytes of bandwidth? There's a big difference in that, and you have to have minimal bandwidth in order to deliver a stream properly, and it varies based on all of these different relationships. What's the resolution? What is the frame rate that you're filming at? And also, what's the bit rate that you're trying to encode this content with? The last thing on here is the audio sample rate. Again, audio sample rate is as important as all of these other relationships because the higher the audio sample rate, the better quality audio it is. Most audio is done over 44K. Some people do it at 96. It's just different based on the quality of audio that people want to have. So it's also an important relationship to think about when you're going into these types of things. So this is a great slide that shows you the different types of bitrate requirements based on standard and high quality streams. And as you can see on these, the higher the resolution, the more bitrate that you need in order to be able to deliver that as a proper stream. So starting at 360p, which is below HD, the bitrate requirement is only 1 megabyte per second. Going up into 4K, which is 2160, the bitrate is much, much higher, exponentially higher. And that's on the standard quality. The higher quality makes it even more. So the difference between these is, do I need standard or do I need high quality? It's all about who your audience is and how you're delivering this. If you're delivering a stream that's possibly needs to be at 1080, but people are going to be watching it on a computer or on a cell phone, then your bit rate may not need to be as high quality as it would be somebody watching it on a 4K television, for instance, or on a projection screen, because the larger that you're viewing that image, the more pixelated you can get and the higher the bit rate that you want to be able to view all of this. These are the two different encoded streaming bit rates between H.264 and H.265. The good thing about this that you can tell is between H.264 and H.265, as far as the resolution, you can see that H.265 delivers a much better quality image, but it doesn't require as much bandwidth as you think that it would, being that it's a completely separate platform than H.264. They've done a really good job about being able to package this together and get it in a compressed enough package to get it out of the internet. But you can also see between these two relationships of these platforms as far as frame rate, the required bit rate between a 30 frame rate and a 60 frame rate is much higher and exponentially higher, typically double in the amount of bit rate that's needed. These are a couple of different examples of the required bit rates for the most popular streaming platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, and Livestream. And these vary wildly because of the way that they accept this video and encode it and also decode it on their end in order to be able to show to the audience. Typically with these different platforms, you want to have the ability to hit their max bit rate. Facebook being at 4 megabytes per second. YouTube for a 1920 by 1080 is 6 megabits per second. Something to notice with these two and always take into account when you're going through these different type of platforms, YouTube and Facebook specifically, is you always want to read and see what their native resolution, their native bit rate, and their native bandwidth requirements are for their streams. A lot of people get into YouTube and think that they can stream 4K completely uncompressed, or 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames completely uncompressed, and a lot of times YouTube and Facebook cannot handle streams that high. It's all dependent upon what they're asking for and what they say is going to be the best resolution and bit rate for them, so always read up and check in on that. Considerations. This is a list of things that is my personal checklist that I go through when I'm doing any type of stream. Considerations for every type of room, every type of venue that I go into that help you understand and to know that you're doing things and getting set up for success. So network connections is my number one thing. Always try to have your encoded devices on a hardwired internet connection. The reasoning why behind this is because Wi-Fi can be flaky and it can have lower speeds, especially if you're going into a building such as a church, for instance. A lot of churches don't have very sophisticated Wi-Fi networks. They typically have one Wi-Fi network that is shared by everybody in the building. So what happens when you have your connection on a Wi-Fi connection in the building that everybody else shares? It may be fantastic in setup and you have all the bandwidth that you need, but when 500 people come in and start surfing Instagram on their phones, all your bandwidth is going to go down and you're going to lose the ability to have a strong stream. So always try to get a hardwire connection if you can. Mobile, wired, or Wi-Fi connections, you always need to check your connection speed. When you're using a MiFi router, or even if you're in a desperate situation using a mobile phone as a device as your network connection, speeds vary based on where you are. Everybody's been in a building where they have great cell phone connection. They walk 5 steps in the other direction and the cell phone signal drops. So you always need to make sure where you are, you're static, you're solidly connected. Wired connections is something that's very, very important if you have the ability to get it. Always try to get a dedicated or dry connection directly to the modem or to a network switch that's directly connected to the modem with unimpeded connection. That being said, when you're going into a lot of buildings, there's things that you need to check with an IT department, especially in corporate situations, because they tend to have more of a lockdown going on under their network. You always want to check with network firewall. That includes going through whatever your streaming protocol and your platforms are that you're using. Let's say in this case, we're going to be using YouTube. You want to go through and make sure that the ports that YouTube requires to receive a stream or to output a stream are open on the building network. Most corporate, most churches, a lot of people with sophisticated networks lock off all these ports unless they're being specifically used by something. So always check these different ports and make sure they're available for you. And last but not least, always run a speed test. There's free software on the internet. Speedtest.net is one that I think everybody uses. And there's another one that I like using that is a package of software that's called SolarWinds Network Traffic Generator. There's a whole package of software that goes with that. The reason I like it is it does a few things for you. One, it checks the speed of the network. Two, it also checks network traffic to see if there's any variations. If you're on a network that's shared by a lot of people, it'll let you know if the bandwidth drops out or if there's a lot of packet information that's going across the network. Encoded devices, delivery considerations for all these different devices. So IP cameras, again, you always want to have a hardwired connection. Most IP cameras can be connected through hard power, or they can be connected and run off of PoE power. Outboard monitoring, you always want to set an IP camera. PTZ cameras are hard cameras, box camera style. You always want to make sure that you have an outboard monitor to be able to test that signal, to make sure that the signal is outputting properly, it's at the proper resolution, the proper frame rate. And then one of the things that I get called about the most is firmware updating. Any device that you have, IP cameras, computers, encoders, anything like that, always make sure you're running on the most recent firmware or the most stable firmware that's available. Computer, if you're using a computer to stream, always have a hardwired connection. Again, Wi-Fi, if you are using Wi-Fi, try to get a private network dedicated bandwidth that's specifically for you. So in most buildings, as we mentioned, when you have a Wi-Fi network that everybody shares, you get a lot of people on it, it bogs down the bandwidth. If you're working with an IT professional, have them set up an independent or a private Wi-Fi connection for you that has dedicated bandwidth just for you. Computers, reboot before starting. This is a huge thing for me, specifically being a Mac user. Windows has it a little bit worse than Mac users do, but you never want to be in the middle of a stream using software and have a window pop up that says, hey, we have a software update for you. Do you want to reboot right now? It overtakes all of your windows and it's just a disaster. So always reboot, make sure your software is up to date, and then turn everything off on that computer that could possibly have that computer go to sleep or have a screensaver pop up or have another outboard window pop up that you're not expecting. Test your software limits. When you're streaming with software on a computer, it eats up a ton of processor speed in the computer. So this is true with graphics software as well. So when you're using software for streaming that also has graphics built into it, bottom thirds nameplates or graphics moving behind you, test all of this and test it on the internet with a stream, with a private stream, because when you have all of this going at one time, it may be too much for your computer and you need to know that before you get into it. Again, last but not least, keep your software and your operating system updated. Encoder, update firmware, update firmware, update firmware. The number one call I get for tech support on encoders is out-of-date firmware. So always update it and make sure that it's ready to go. On the encoder, always carry doubles of your connection cables in various lengths. For encoders, that means network cable Cat6. If you're using USB capture devices, USB 2.0, 3.0, USB-C, audio cables, HDMI, HD, SDI, just always have extras of these cables, because I can't tell you how many times I've been in an event where I've had a bad Cat6 cable or I've had an HDMI cable that's flaky. So always be prepared. A UPS is also something that's very important. Uninterrupted power supply. This is something that is a battery backup for your entire rig. So when you have your system that you're running and you have a battery backup, that means if anything happens with power in the building or somebody walks across and accidentally kicks out your power strip, you always have everything staying on, and it has the ability to stay on at the very least until you can power it down properly or until you can shut the software down and get it back to a place to where you can restart everything. Audio, always know your audio source. It's great for anytime you go into a streaming situation, if you're not carrying your own audio setup, to make friends with a sound engineer. Always walk up, introduce yourself, and say, hey, I'm doing a web stream. Can you give me a set of stereo outputs, or can I use a matrix output, or whatever they have the ability to give you. If you make friends with them at the beginning, they're always going to make sure that you have what you need, because they want it to sound great as well. Mobile devices usually have a decent microphone if you're using a mobile device to stream, but there are a lot of great microphones that connect to a mobile device that give you really, really good audio. Everything from microphones that have various polar patterns built into them through app software, all the way to the ability to connect a lavalier microphone into a mobile device. IP cameras are really great because they typically have an audio input built into the back of the camera. So for simplistic streams, if you're using a single IP camera, you can a lot of times just plug an audio device right in the back of it, whether it's a wireless microphone, a boundary microphone, or whatever, and it will take that audio and encode it with the video going out through a web-based interface on the IP camera. USB cameras will typically have a built-in mic, but standalone USB microphones are also a great solution for small streams in classrooms or in other settings that are just very easy to plug and play and can also be packaged together with the USB video going out to streaming. Lighting. Lighting is probably the most overlooked but the most important thing in web streaming. Key lighting is always important. Different displays have different contrast settings, so it can be difficult to see and make out facial details in poorly lit environments. So my rule of thumb when I'm doing lighting personally is I like to have a minimum of 50-foot candles on the face, which can be measured with a lighting tool. And then I also like to use the color temperature of lighting to be between 3,000 and 5,000 Kelvin based on skin tone. The lower the Kelvin, the warmer the light is, the higher Kelvin, the colder the light is. So what you want to do is you want to find a happy medium, especially in situations where you may have a lot of guest speakers that are coming on and off the stage, because you don't want to have a tone of your lighting or a color temperature of your lighting that is too cold or too warm, because you may have varying skin tones. Some people may be darker, some people may be lighter, and colder color temperatures don't look great on people that have very, very light skin. So you always want to be cognizant of that and make sure that you're picking a good middle of the road color temperature. For me personally, it typically lies between 2,500 and 3,500 Kelvin. That's where I like to live on lighting, but always play with it with who your presenters are. Additional tips: always test your stream thoroughly and test a broadcast. Video quality, graphics, audio quality, and always start your broadcast early. What I mean by that is if you're going to be streaming, let's say to YouTube, YouTube has a very sophisticated back-end software platform that allows you to start your stream and view your stream, view the quality, view the stability, view your graphics and everything in the software platform before you physically broadcast it out to your audience. So always have that set up and always go into that early. You know, I always try to have my stream going minimum 30 minutes early so I can make sure there's no hiccups, it's running, and then at the click of a button on YouTube, it's already ready to go. Record all of your streams if you can. I can't tell you how many times I have gone into a stream that I've done. It never fails that I have somebody come up afterwards, whether they've asked for it or not, and said, hey, do you have a recording of that? Do you have a copy of that? I'd like to take it home with me, or I'd like to be able to give it to my audience. Whether people ask for it or not, always record it. The good thing about that is you have it because the client's gonna ask for it. The other good thing about that on your end is it gives you the ability, if the client doesn't ask for it, to go back and see how you can do things better. You can review your work. You can see if your camera switching was good. You can see if your color temperature and your lighting was where it needed to be. And it helps you become a better engineer or a better streaming personnel. Create user channel on various platforms to use at the last minute as an alternate. This is very important and something that I do too. I have a membership, or I have a account on every streaming platform there is known to man. And the reasoning is especially if you're a freelance person, you always get in these situations where people understand or they know the word web streaming, but they don't really understand how they deliver it. So you walk into a web stream, let's say for a city council that's never done it before, and you say, okay, I have all of my gear here, how would you like to stream? And a lot of times they're gonna say, well, what's the easiest way to do this? And so you wanna have the ability to say, I have the ability to stream via these platforms. Do you have a YouTube page? Do you have a Facebook page? Do you have these other types of pages? A lot of times they're gonna say no. So what that allows you to do is say, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna stream to my personal YouTube page, and I can give you a code that you can email to people and they'll be able to view it. And at the very least, you can get the stream out there and then give them a recorded copy that they can put on their website later. So always a backup. And the other thing that I like to have as well is to make sure that you always have a computer that has any type of editing software that you could possibly think of. That includes graphics, video, and audio editing capabilities. I personally use the Adobe Creative Cloud because it covers all of these in one software platform. It's $70 a month for the Creative Cloud, and that gives you graphics editing, video editing, and audio editing all in one software package. And last but not least, use quality cable. I can't say this enough to everybody. No matter what situation you go, spend the money. I know Amazon has a lot of cables that are available that are branded from them, and these other companies do. Use quality cable from people that make it professionally and use it a lot. So this is examples of different types of streaming setups, just to give you a visual representation of the different setups from simplistic all the way up to sophisticated. So this is a mobile source setup. You have a mobile device, whether it's an iPad or an Android device or your phone. That device is capturing through the camera, and it's also encoding. From encoding, it is sending that out through your data network to the internet, where any of these different types of streaming platforms can then receive that stream, and it can decode it on the far end to your phone or to your computer or even a television if you want to. This is a setup that would use an IP camera, whether it's a PTZ or a block camera. You have the ability, as we'd mentioned, a lot of times with IP cameras, you can use an auxiliary audio source. So here I have an example of a little mixer. So if you needed more than a few channels of audio, you could run the mixer out, run it into the auxiliary audio of the PTZ or the block camera. And the computer is actually just doing control. Most IP cameras have a web-based interface that allows you to go and set all of the parameters and the settings in there, and then once you've set those, it's kind of a set and forget situation. From there, you can take an Ethernet cable and go directly into a network, which could take your video that's already been encoded within the camera, and it gets out to the internet. And then on the far end, you have the ability to decode this through Android tablet, computer, or on the very bottom I have a decoder, and a decoder is just receiving that video and gives you an HDMI or an HDSDI output to view that through a projector or through a display of some sort. This is a USB camera setup. A lot of people are probably familiar with this. You can utilize a USB camera that's doing the capturing going into the computer, and then you also may have the ability, if you want, using audio capture through a console, or you may use USB microphones, but the computer is actually doing the encoding for you through software, or it is utilizing one of these streaming platforms to actually do the encoding for you. And again, once the encoding process happens through the computer, through the software, it's able to be sent out over the internet and viewed by any of these types of devices. This is another USB capture that's a little more sophisticated. Let's say that you're a small church or a school and you want to have the ability to utilize a camera switcher. Well, a lot of people make video capture devices that have professional video inputs on them. This is one that just happens to do USB 3.0, but it can receive an HDMI signal. So you could have a camera switcher that's doing broadcast switching with several cameras. You could have an audio console that's also running into the camera switcher, embedding the video and the audio and sending that out through HDMI, where it's then captured by this USB 3.0 capture device and then run into a computer, which then sends it out to the internet and can then be viewed by other devices. This is network capture, which is probably the most secure and the most popular type of streaming as far as installation and professional streaming. So a hardware encoder is in place. This is showing you an example of a PTZ camera also being used with a camera switcher or a broadcast switcher. You have an outboard audio device. Both are going into this hardware encoder, and you have a computer that's controlling the hardware encoder. So one of the reasons that a lot of people use a hardware encoder in a professional situation as opposed to using a USB encoder or capture in a computer is because a hardware encoder doesn't have any limitations on the processing speed like a computer does. It can run nonstop by itself, and it's typically has the max amount of bandwidth capabilities and processing speed that you would need to deliver very, very high quality streams. So with a computer, as we had mentioned, if you have a lot of software, you have a lot of things going on with your computer, you're kind of limited on your processing power. That doesn't happen typically with hardware encoders. So again, going from a camera switcher, your audio source, into this network encoder, you use a computer to set your IP addressing and how you're going to deliver that to these different platforms. And then on the other side of that, it can be received and viewed through any of these types of devices. This is also network capture. So network capturing is something that's a sophisticated way of taking a hardware encoder and putting it inside devices. This particular one that I'm showing is one that allows you to have a video switcher, but it also has an encoder built into it. This is becoming very popular for broadcast camera switchers that do streaming as well. They're just taking the encoder and building into the device and eliminating an extra piece of hardware. So in this case, you would take your cameras, run it into the broadcast switcher. You would take your audio, run it into the broadcast switcher. You would set up your parameters and your IP addressing and such through a control computer, and then that would go out to the internet to then be delivered to these devices. So that's the basics of streaming and how you're able to deliver things to your audience. And thank you guys for having me, and I appreciate it and hope you learned something.
There was a lot of great information there on streaming. I think there's a lot that people can put into practice immediately today. Look for us on social media and join us next time where we'll be live from the CTS Learning Lab.